I never liked Pastor Johann. He was too young, too smooth with his words, and his eyes were cold, like he saw straight through you. But he was a man of God, or so we thought. So we gave him the respect his title demanded. It was in a small village in rural Hungary, where the church was the heart of the town. Pastor Johann came one autumn, replacing old Father Miklos, who had passed quietly in his sleep. From the start, things felt wrong. Johann's sermons were fiery, full of damnation and judgment. Unlike the gentle words we were used to, the church started to feel colder, darker, even on sunny days. One evening, during a prayer meeting, I saw something I can't unsee. Johann was kneeling before the altar, back to us, leading the prayer. As I bowed my head, I noticed his shadow on the floor. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I stared, I realized something was off. His shadow didn't match his movements. When he raised his arms in prayer, the shadow stayed still. When he turned his head to one side, the shadow seemed to look the other way. I nudged my neighbor, Clara, to see if she noticed, but when she looked, the shadow was normal again. I felt foolish for even mentioning it. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about that shadow stuck in my mind. I decided to walk to the church. It was foolish, I know, but curiosity has always been my weakness. The streets were quiet. The only sound was my footsteps on the cobblestones. When I reached the church, the heavy doors were slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick, and the candles on the altar burned with a strange greenish hue. That's when I heard the whispers. They weren't in Hungarian or any language I recognized. They came from the altar, low and hissing. I hid behind a pew and peeked out. Johann was there, but he wasn't alone. Something stood beside him, a figure cloaked in shadows, taller than any man, with long, spindly fingers that seemed to writhe like snakes. Johann was speaking to it, his voice low and trembling. "Have I done enough?" he asked. "Will you give me what you promise?" The shadow thing didn't speak, but its form shifted, like smoke caught in a draft. Johann cried out, clutching his head, and for a moment his face was wrong. His features twisted, his mouth stretched too wide, his eyes black as coal. I stumbled backward, knocking over a candlestick. The noise echoed through the church, and both Johann and the shadow turned toward me. I'll never forget the look on his face. Pure rage, and something else, something inhuman. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my house, bolted the door, and prayed until dawn. The next morning, Johann was gone. The church elders said he left without a word, abandoning his duties. They found his robe folded neatly on the altar, but nothing else. No one ever spoke of him again, like the whole village agreed to forget. But I can't forget. I thought Pastor Johann was gone for good. Weeks passed, and the village returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could after what I had seen. The church got a new priest, Father Andres, an older, kind man who spoke softly and brought comfort. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. One evening, as I walked home from the market, I felt it again, that creeping cold, a heavy weight in the air. The sun had just set, and shadows stretched long on the cobblestone streets. I turned a corner and froze. Johann was there. He stood at the edge of the woods, wearing the same black robes. But his face, it wasn't right. His eyes were pitch black, no whites left, and his mouth seemed to curl in an unnatural grin. He didn't move, just stared at me unblinking. I ran. My groceries spilled behind me, but I didn't care. I slammed my door shut and bolted it. My heart was pounding, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it couldn't be real, that my mind was playing tricks. But then the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap, tap, tap on the door. I held my breath, praying it would stop, but it grew louder, more insistent. "Open the door," a voice called. It was Johann's voice, but it was wrong. like two voices speaking at once, one human, one something else. I stayed silent, pressing myself against the farthest wall. The knocking turned to pounding, shaking the door in its frame. You saw, the voice hissed. You know, the pounding stopped suddenly, and the silence was worse. I didn't dare move. Hours passed before I finally crept to the window. Johann was gone. The next day, I told Father Andres what happened. He listened carefully, his face growing pale. When I finished, he crossed himself and said, Johann made a deal with something we didn't understand. Whatever he brought here, it's not done yet. Father Andres blessed my home and gave me a crucifix, but it didn't feel like enough. And now, every night, I see shadows that don't belong. I hear whispers outside my window. Johann may be gone, but whatever he let in is still here, watching